HR tech, work tech, and investment are transforming the future of work. Are you in the know? Welcome to the Work Tech Podcast. Join host George LaRocque for expert insights on the trends, M&A activity, and strategies shaping the workplace. Brought to you by oneworktech.com and the Work-Defined Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's George LaRocque. Welcome back to Work Tech. I'm thrilled to have a friend, colleague, thought leader on Work Tech today. We've got Cole Napper, the VP of Research, Innovation, and Talent Insights at Lightcast. And you may or may not be familiar with Lightcast, their legacy, and all the value they provide in the form of data and insights to both employers and platform players. But there's a lot going on at Lightcast. I'm excited to dig in and catch up with Cole and with Lightcast. Welcome, Cole.
Yeah, thanks for having me, George.
Thanks for being here. So for anyone that doesn't know you or might not be familiar with Lightcast, just a quick intro, and then we'll spend more time digging in on everything.
Sure. So I have a background. I've spent most of my career in industry. So for some big, large multinational companies, so the FedEx, PepsiCo, Toyota, also in the VC-backed startup space at a few of those organizations as well. But recently joined Lightcast in December prior to being a customer. If people aren't familiar with the name Lightcast, it's because they may be familiar with some of our predecessors. So MZ and Burning Glass both had over a 20-year history before they were merged together, I believe in 2021, and the name Lightcast came into existence. But what our organization does is we merge hundreds of billions of constantly updated and vetted talent insights together to help transform organizations to create a skill-based future. What's interesting about us compared to maybe some other organizations that do similar things is we not only cut across the enterprise type of organizations, but we support the public sector at all levels, so the federal, state, and municipal level, as well as higher education institutions. So some of the leading universities like Stanford and Harvard, all the way down to your local community college as well. And so we have a really great kind of mission as an organization, but also we're doing some really cutting edge work that maybe we can get into today.
Yeah, for sure. Before we go there, framing a little bit more about Lightcast, we like to put everybody in boxes, right? And those boxes are categories many times. So when I think of Lightcast, I think of the talent intelligence category. And here's the thing about talent intelligence is as many people as I ask about talent intelligence, I'll get a different definition from each most of the time. So I think that Lightcast it could have been the first, definitely one of the first to really position within that category, maybe creating that category. So we can go back and forth on this a little bit. What does Lightcast call? What does talent intelligence mean to Lightcast? What's the definition?
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually true, but we say we created the market category of talent intelligence, and I would say we continue to define it as well. Through the innovation that we keep putting forward. But it seems like, especially since 2022, everybody and their brother calls themselves a talent intelligence company or a talent intelligence platform nowadays. And so it does sort of muddy the waters. But the way, and I want to get your perspective on this too, George, because I see you as one of the most thoughtful people out there in terms of understanding the work tech space and even defining that as a concept too. So congratulations there. But also understanding the financials behind our industry and seeing where the investment goes and really kind of reading the tea leaves to see where things are going. But the way I define talent intelligence is looking and using labor market information to try to influence the future talent profile, skills, and understanding of the future for organizations. And Lightcast is right smack dab in the middle of that. I would say many of the other companies that brand themselves as talent intelligence, I'm not sure are more peripheral to that is probably the nice way of putting it, but I think that there's will the real talent intelligence please stand up would probably be a good way of putting it, right?
Okay. So I think that's a good definition. I think a lot of the players that call themselves talent intelligence, and you don't fall in, I'm not lumping you in with this group. They're really talent analytics, people analytics. I think, intelligence sounds good. It sounds more important than analytics. And I get why they would want to gravitate, toward that. But, drawing from my enterprise and looking at my core HR data, my recruiting data, my internal mobility data, performance data, learning data, whatever, that's people analytics. That's talent analytics. That's when I think of intelligence, and this is from WorkTech's perspective, the business, and from my perspective, I think of market intelligence. So it's talent is the market, labor is the market, and we may pull some internal data in to benchmark with that market data, as you would if you were going to market using market intelligence from a go-to-market perspective to understand, how your customers compare to the market. How do my employees compare to the market? Maybe it's compensation, maybe it's my hiring process I'm comparing, my internal hiring process, what have you, my skills, taxonomy, all of this, right? But I'm looking at what in a geography, in my universe, and with an industry, with a skill set, I'm learning something there. That's how I view it. And I think that's very much how you positioned it there as well. So
I love that, George.
Violent agreement on that one.
This is why you make the big bucks, man. You get it. And that's why you're good at what you do.
Thank you for that. But I think it's one of the hardest things for someone, especially on the employer side, the buyer side, someone who's becoming a customer is understanding this, sort of where does everybody fit? And, you go to the big trade events, the big industry events, and everybody's saying the same things. So I think it speaks to trends, and it speaks to, where the market might be headed, but it's challenging. So that's wearing the analyst hat, the analyst and advisor hat, if we can help them understand, or have a more useful box to put people in, boxes, definitions to measure people against, that's helpful. But all right, so I had the pleasure recently of receiving a briefing from you and your team at Lightcast. And I have to say that one of the things that I had forgotten was how many different types of data sources, not just who you're supporting, but you talk about hundreds of billions of data, data points, but the different types of data. This isn't just about, I think a lot of us think of talent intelligence like we've defined it and think, it's learning from job postings. Sure, that's a part of it. But talk about the other sources of data and the value that data brings to the Lightcast and your partners and customers.
Absolutely. Well, we could spend hours and hours talking about the literal, going line by line, the data points here, but I'll try to distill it down to be something that's easily digestible.
Yep.
And so I don't want to actually undersell the value of job postings. Right. Because there is so much data that comes from those, whether it be job titles themselves, which filter into things like the taxonomy work that we do, the job architecture work that we do, the understanding of emerging skills and trends, but going into thinking about things like wage data, advertised salaries, the sectors, the parts of the economy. Like I was talking to some of our product team the other day, and I asked them somewhat of a provocative question. I said, could you model the entire economy based on our data? And they said, you know what, we never really thought about it that way, but we really are kind of we've created a micro model version of the entire world's economy within our data sets. And it's just using this type of information, whether it be job postings on remote work or the composition of organization, when that leads into the second component, which is profile data.
The Use Case podcast is where technology vendors get to talk about themselves. And it's a wonderful place for vendors, investors, and practitioners to listen to the story of the solution, the features, the benefits, the attributes, etc. And we get to know the CEO or founder during the call, and we also get to know the tech. So subscribe to the Use Case podcast.
So where somebody went to school, like where they work, their education, their job titles, their skills, the companies that they've used to work for, where they're going in their careers, keywords, and the regions in which they work. All of that is really key industry occupation data. And I'll say, we have a strong background in economics, labor economics specifically, which links our data to all the major occupational data sets that are out there. So thinking of things like SOC codes and ONET, we actually provide some of the data sets to those federal government organizations because of the robustness of our data. And then the last is labor market information. So this is data that you get from things like the BLS, like the census, the class of worker, the demographics, but it's about working through that process in over 41 different countries. We actually have data on 151 different countries, but because Lightcast scrutinizes this data so much, we only publish it because we feel like the quality is there for 41 different countries right now. But again, to that provocative question of can you model the whole world? Based on some crummy data from different places, we can model just about everything that's publicly accessible out there.
Wow. And it's that government data, the workforce data, and then you're bringing the end customer, the employer's data in and benchmarking. What are some of the more interesting and innovative use cases for this? When you've got an employer, because we had some great conversations about what you can do with skills and things like that kind of blew my mind as I started thinking about it. What would you want folks to get their head around here when they think about this data?
Well, there's different use cases depending on what people are doing in enterprises. And so you could go to like some of the bread and butter talent intelligence use cases, and that can be things like the job architecture, the compensations, the skill profiles, trying to create skills-based organizations, location strategy, global data that's needed. And when you get into like kind of the fun areas that I like from my prior experiences, it's like doing things to support talent acquisition functions, workforce planning, headcount, people analytics, and then lumping all of that together to do things that most organizations really don't have a lot of insight to. When you were defining, intelligence as market intelligence earlier, my mind immediately went to what about competitive intelligence?
Right.
How do you get understanding and intelligence of information that you aren't aware of about the companies in which you're competing against in your industry? And so Lightcast has access to all of that type of data, and we can support so many different use cases. And I haven't even scratched the surface of how we support use cases in higher education as well as in the public sector. But all of these things are combined together with one another. And so if an organization is, for instance, trying to understand skills and how skills are going to play a role in their organization, they want to know how are skills getting created. Well, guess what? That's happening through a variety of different mechanisms in the education sphere and the learning sphere, right? If they're wanting to create internal mobility, guess what? They're going to be using tools like our Talent Transform tool to connect their human capital management system to their learning system, to their applicant tracking system, to show how that skills data filters between all of those platforms. And then you get into the areas that, again, I interface with work in terms of the research that we do in thought leadership is how do skills play a role in the demographics of the country and even the globe, right? And so as baby boomers retire and the work that we've done on the rising storm to show as baby boomers retire, what is that going to do to the skill composition of our world? And are we going to have enough people who are skilled to do the jobs of the future? And again, I mean, everybody talks about AI, and I know we're going to talk about it more in a minute, but how is that changing the skill composition of workforces, and how are they going to upskill and reskill to be ready for the jobs of the future?
Right. And I want you to put some detail around this, but one of the things that we talked about was around skills was that taxonomy, that sort of normalizing those skills. And it felt to me like you were starting to deliver on the promise of AI, where taking the sting out of the change management involved in normalizing on skills. And I don't want to get out over my skis or commit Lightcast to anything you're not doing. But can you talk a little bit about that?
People would not believe the level and amount of use cases there are for how we're utilizing different kinds of machine learning and AI to help ingest, classify, understand, and contextualize all of the skills data and all that taxonomic data that you mentioned earlier. We have an open skills taxonomy that anybody can connect into that is refreshed monthly. It has over 32,000 skills, and it's considered to be the universal standard. And that's why we open source it. So many of our platform companies that we partner with, they use it as a standard, or we map our standard to their standard. And we even have competitors who are kind of under the table, utilizing that data as well, which I find to be humorous at times also. But really, to me, the future, it's not just taxonomies, it's ontologies. And, if people don't understand what the word taxonomy means, because it is somewhat confusing, I've heard people say, a taxonomy, that's just a list, right? It's actually a way of categorizing the world. So you think about like a city is a part of a state is a part of a country, and a country is a part of the globe. That's a taxonomic way of looking at categorizing things. But what's an ontology? I don't think anybody really knows what an ontology is. And it's about interconnecting and showing the relationships between all of those skills. And we are in the process using, AI and knowledge graphing technology to put together and create the first real skills ontology based on top of that skills taxonomy that everybody has come to know and love. And what does that mean? That's going to be able to show the weights and the distribution and the relationships between all the skills. So if a person is to build a skill in one area, here are the corresponding skills that may have come along with it. Here are the relationships that they should do to if they want to pursue a particular career pathway, and being able to have like a drop down that links to all of those things so that they can take proactive steps and create learning and training associated with it. And so I'm just super excited about the direction things are going. And I think people are going to be really impressed when they see what a skills ontology looks like in the first place.
And when I hear that, I get excited because it means that while you do want to proliferate that standardization through your enterprise, a lot that change management and just getting to that can be a multi-year project and millions of dollars and external consultants. It's a huge change management exercise. This is sort of this gets you to a place where you're able to understand those skills across the organization and maybe understand where you need more change, or where to focus those efforts. Am I looking at this the right way?
You were looking at it absolutely the right way. Taxonomies are really only the beginning.
Yeah.
Right. In organizations, and really your point is well taken, that if you're going to make a skills-based transformation for your entire organization, you're making a multi-million, multi-year commitment to do so. And one of our goals is to reduce the barriers to entry for doing so.
Yeah.
And so I think our step in this direction is really going to be seen as a huge employer-friendly step to make this transition easier and more scalable. And I'll even complement it with this, because again, we not only do skills-related information. When you have that accessible labor market intelligence that's layered on top of the skills, you can layer on the market availability for that talent. What part of that talent is employed by your competitors? But you can even contextualize it as we layer in more qualitative information about things like employer brand, or the sentiment of employers, or even things like, layoffs have been a hot trend lately, or where are employers expanding from a geographical sense, or what's going on in terms of their employer value proposition, like what are the benefits that they're offering. So layering in the things that contextualize that information so that organizations can not only proactively try to be a skills-based organization, but even utilize it to differentiate their employer value proposition.
Yeah, and you're doing this both for employers, but also other tech providers who, they may own a certain workflow, and this external labor market data, talent intelligence data is helping them contextualize a workforce or a process and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right on. Because what we are not an HCM. We're not an LMS. We're not an applicant tracking system. We just make those tools better and communicate with one another. And so we have partnerships with all the major HCMs, whether it be Workday, SAP, Oracle, UKG. We have partnerships with almost all the major LMSs, all the major applicant tracking systems, and even many of the tools that are helping organizations enable the skills-based future, whether it be a Phenom or a Visier or what have you. I think we have over 150 HR technology partnerships that are in place right now. And so we really consider ourselves to be the Switzerland of talent intelligence and labor market information. And so if you use us, you can use us with virtually anyone, in addition to, if you need that type of consulting or professional services layered on top.
Yep. Yeah. So you brought up AI, which you can't have a conversation about tech without bringing up AI. And you've mentioned you're not a platform, which is important to understand. But I mean, data is really what the AI needs in order to be most effective, right? So how do you view Lightcast in this the market's shifting into this AI forward experience?
Yep.
Where do you fit there?
I would say that, a lot of people look at AI as a gold rush type situation. And many people, this analogy has been overutilized nowadays, but people say no one actually made money in the gold rush except for the people who were selling picks and shovels. And so who are the picks and shovels players in the HR tech space of that gold rush? In our mind, every one of the platform players, at least as far as I can tell, is trying to layer on an AI wrapper to what they're doing. And we just fundamentally, we have like a beta of a tool we call Ask Lightcast just to make it easy to access our data inside our tool. But that's not where the value lies. We say internally that we are becoming a DaaS organization, so a data as a service organization. And that is the picks and shovels of this gold rush, is that we can bring in our data. So imagine, the four walls of an organization. They have all the access to their own internal information, and AI, if they put an AI wrapper on that can get them only so far in terms of trying to understand and create the intelligence that AI can bring. Well, guess what? If you're able to bring in, again, the billions and billions of data points via a data share type agreement with Lightcast into your tools, and then layer that with an AI wrapper on top, which we've had some partnerships with some firms who are already using this type of data. And it's really exciting to get to see where this is going and kind of be on the bleeding edge. But this is the data layer that's going to provide all the context and all the value. And what you cannot do is you can't just use a bunch of, unstructured raw data feeds like scraping the web or something like that. You need really good data definitions. You need really good metadata. You need really good cleansed information. We've done all of the work to make your company's data and the labor market data AI ready for virtually any HR use case that we've described before in this conversation. And so I see Lightcast incredibly well positioned to go forward because they said, 10, 15 years ago that data was the new oil. I really think for the first time that statement's going to become true.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's so many analogies. I like the gold rush analogy, but even the web itself, it's like when it was first coming on, everybody thought the website creators and the app creators, which were going to just proliferate, and that's where all the money was. But it was really in sort of the infrastructure and all the enablement, picks and shovels, to your point. One of the things I want to make sure we touch on, and you mentioned the Rising Storm work that you had done before. I don't know if it was a direct evolution, but you've just released the new workforce risk outlook, and that seems like the next chapter or the next book in that. Am I right?
Yeah, you are right. Let me share my screen really quick. Okay. I just want to show people a chart that maybe they've never seen, and so. The Rising Storm was some research that Lightcast published last year, and it just blew up, which was based on some of my colleague Ron Hetrick's work that started, I think, 3 years ago with what was called the demographic drought. And what you can see on my screen here is the different generations in the workforce. And you can see prior to now, the baby boomer generation was the largest that had ever entered the workforce. But every year that passes, more and more baby boomers are retiring. Therefore, they're making less and less of the workforce population. And you can see millennials have now achieved the largest status, where Gen Xers are relatively flat and actually starting to dip down just a tiny bit. And then the silent generation is virtually gone. And in 2023 is actually when Gen Z passed the baby boomers as being more of a composition of the workforce than the baby boomers are. And what does that mean? Well, one of the thoughts that came out after we published The Rising Storm was, okay, you scared us. We see that there are some problems coming because we know that the skills of the future may not be there, and we might not literally have enough human beings to tackle all the work. Like the first report they ever wrote was called "Who's Going to Do the Work?" Well, there may not be enough human beings to do the work. And so organizations said, well, what are we supposed to do with this? And so what we did is we published the next instantiation of about a week ago called the Workforce Risk Outlook. And this is where we scored every one of the Fortune 1000 companies and gave them a risk score between 1 and 5 for how risky their organization's workforce outlook is over the next 10 years. And that the higher the score, the more risky it is. The top 3 riskiest industries were construction, healthcare, hospitality, followed by retail, and I believe it is the wholesale space. Some of the lower industries, but are still risky, are things like the tech industry and the professional services that we always want to talk about. But if you look at these scores, nobody scores a 1. A 1 would be if the risk stays the same as it is today. Every single Fortune 1000 company's risk score is higher than 1, which means all of their workforce challenges are going to be exacerbated over time. And so one of the things that we did in this research is we plotted it on 4 different categories. Their industry risk, so how risky is it within that particular industry? The occupation risk, so breaking down every employer into their top 10 highest incumbent jobs and saying the risk of each one of those roles. We looked at the market risk, so literally, 2 employers can be in the same industry, but they may not have the same geographical footprint as one another. So what are the risks within the markets that they operate to have the talent that's available for them? And then the last is AI risk. Now, this is kind of a flip on what most people talk about AI. They say, oh, is AI going to take all of our jobs or something along those lines? But what we look at is AI actually gives organizations the ability to augment or automate work so that if they don't have enough human beings to do that work in the future, at least if AI can come in and help augment those roles, that could decrease the risk for that organization. So what it gives them is what I call optionality. And so really, the higher your risk score, the less optionality that your workforce has. And so the example that I've given quite a few times now is that the differences between like a Walmart and an Amazon. Walmart and Amazon are roughly the same size, have roughly the same revenue, and are competing in the same commerce and e-commerce industries. But Walmart's risk score is substantially higher than Amazon's. And the reason why is because of the market risk. Walmart has a much more extensive brick and mortar presence in many, many geographies, including rural and less populated areas, which means as the workforce demographics change, especially in those rural and demographic areas, they're going to be more and more challenged to staff those brick and mortar stores unless they make huge investments in the future. Yeah. Whereas Amazon is primarily on the knowledge worker sector of their jobs in large metropolitan areas that have a good supply of talent. The only parts of their business that are more at risk are their distribution and warehouse centers. And I tell people it's no coincidence that when Amazon decided to do experiments with opening up physical brick and mortar locations, that they chose to create a model where there were literally no workers in the store, right? And it's because they know in the future they may not be able to staff that store if it happened to really take off as a proof of concept.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so interesting. And I guess the risk from company to company, but also, region to region, industry to industry, the profile, they may have equivalent risk, but it's based on different factors, based on the business models, all those different elements that we talked about. It's quite, there's a lot there. I've scrolled through the site. There's a lot of data there. There's a lot of insight there. Where can folks what's the URL where they can
Yeah,
access this?
I'll ask you. I'll ask you to share it in the show notes if you don't mind.
Of course.
It's on Lightcast website, and it's lightcast.io/risk outlook. And so again, you can share it in the show notes with everyone. But I'd encourage you, because all this data is publicly available. Go in and look up your organization. And guess what? We've scored much beyond the Fortune 1000 companies. That's just what we published. And so there's a link to click if you want to understand your organization and you don't see it showing up, that we will actually reach out to you and show you that information about your organization. Because I think we've done it for something like 10,000 employers that are out there.
Wow. That's great. And so... And the website, right? You've given the URL. That's probably the best place to learn more about Lightcast. And what about you, Cole? Where can folks connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, they can find me on LinkedIn. Obviously, go to Lightcast website. We've only scratched the surface of the products and resources that we have, and we are always producing really world-class research that gets put out there. And so I'm publishing things constantly. So if you want to learn more about this type of stuff, just follow me on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out or I go to a lot of conferences too. So if you want to bump into me and shake my hand, let me know.
Great. Well, Cole, thank you so much for being here and telling the Lightcast story here at WorkTech. I know you're busy. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, George.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody, wherever you're watching, if you're out on YouTube or you're listening on the Work Defined Podcast Network or watching or listening over at WorkTech. Thanks, and until next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the WorkTech podcast. Visit us at oneworktech.com and find out why WorkTech is considered the most trusted source of market intelligence and strategic advice for WorkTech. Subscribe to the WorkTech YouTube channel for video episodes and exclusive content. And be sure to check out the entire Work Defined podcast network at wrkdefined.com for more podcasts on the world of work.